Hi, I'm Chen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Asian American Writers Workshop. The other day, this intern of mine was telling me that there are these boxes where you can look at little people talking about things. So we thought we would film this and see how it would go. Welcome to our YouTube page. To tell you a little bit about ourselves, the Asian American Writers Workshop is dedicated to inventing the future of Asian American literary culture. Elsewhere on this page, you can see videos of Junot Diaz, Eddie Huang, Roxane Gay, as well as videos of activists and artists. So I hope you can take a look. We have a great show here. We have a live space in New York, and we're filming this in front of our live studio audience in Fuzhou, China. So I'm excited. I have today Philip Metris, who's an NEA fellow, acclaimed translator and poet. We're going to be talking about his book, Sand Opera, which is a redaction of Standard Operating Procedure, which is the name of the manual from the Department of Defense. The book kind of revisits the history of torture victims in Abu Ghraib and in Guantanamo Bay, often redacting, splicing, remixing their texts, and the texts, are the often banal official texts around U.S. empire in the Middle East to create an opera, a song, an aria, a recitative out of the lashings of the tortured body. So, Phil, you started thinking about your book around the days after 9/11, where you're trying to negotiate with what the United States was doing in the Middle East, as well as your own identity with being an Arab American. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of those feelings you were having, how before you got to the process, like how things were germinating in your mind.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I was, absolutely stunned by the attacks of September 11th in ways that that were complicated by the history that I came to it with, which is to say, on the one hand, it seemed absolutely sort of unthinkable, actually, that people could commandeer, hijack these planes, and then fly them into these buildings, and then have the buildings go down. It just seemed absolutely apocalyptic. And I knew a couple people, a father of a college classmate who died there, and many people that I've known were traumatized by it, who lived in New York. At the same time, I was also really keenly aware of the history of U.S. imperialism in the Middle East, and had worked really hard on ending the economic sanctions in Iraq, and knowing, Madeleine Albright's kind of horrific statement that she said when Leslie Stahl asked her on 60 Minutes, it said that up to 500,000 children or 1.5 million children died as a result of the sanctions. And Madeleine Albright says, "We think the price is worth it."
Wow.
And I thought,
that sucks.
To me, that sort of exemplified this sort of rupture in our thinking about other people and what the U.S.'s relationship is to people in Iraq. And I think probably those numbers are inflated, but let's say they're 20,000. That's horrific enough.
There was a Doctors Without Borders report recently that said that in terms of the region, like 1.5 million people had died from the U.S. wars.
Right, and that's probably just dating from 2003.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, I came to conscience in 1991, the Persian Gulf War, and saw the absolutely almost psychotic representation of that war, like just totally dissociated from the reality of war. It was shown as a sort of football game. It was a spectacle, and knowing what happened in the days and years after that, and sort of uncovering that as a scholar, actually trying to figure out what happened, was with me that whole decade actually before the 9/11 attacks. And doing things like, I went to a post office in Bloomington, Indiana, where I was a grad student with a number of other activists, to send literally Band-Aids to Iraq. This is a symbolic action. And that is among the things that were illegal to send to Iraq under the very stringent UN, US-led economic sanctions regime, which was supposed to depose Saddam, but actually didn't do anything of the sort. So coming to that moment, that cataclysmic, traumatic moment of 9/11, was all of this other stuff going on. And I have to admit that I sort of knew that knew the anger that would lead someone to plan or plot this sort of thing, and that it was real, and that maybe one of the things that I could do is to try to be part of the story that might help understand what those attacks came from, if not totally explain them, because I don't think there's any explaining traumatic historical events like that. And so for a long time I was struggling with how to approach this question of, how to write about the things that were happening. 9/11, the invasion of Afghanistan, and then the invasion of Iraq, which was the real precipitating, I think, moment for thinking about the book.
So your book is very experimental in a lot of ways. It's a multimedia text. We can probably zoom in on some part of this, but a lot of it involves using redacted documents. In fact, I heard that you even got the Gitmo guide from WikiLeaks.
That's right. And
I was wondering if you could talk about that process. How did you decide what to redact? And it's not all just military documents, of course.
That's right. For many years, studying how poets were responding to war in the United States, particularly distant from the scene of battle, one of the things that I noticed was a strategy that I thought was really compelling was employing documentary evidence as a way of supplementing what couldn't be experienced firsthand. And actually, in the post-structural age, we already have a skepticism anyway about the authenticity of and the veracity of first-person witness. So the document becomes a way of working through things that are traumatic or are illegible without these documents, and it becomes a way of, sort of technology of the cyborg in a sense. It becomes an extension of ourselves and our understanding. So I just had all of these things around, and then some of them appeared to my email box, like the WikiLeaks email I got, which sent this standard operating procedure manual to me and probably, I don't know, dozens or hundreds of other people who somehow appeared on WikiLeaks, persons of interest, mailing list. And honestly, when I received it, it was probably in the early 2000s. I was a little bit unsure that I should even open it, or maybe it was, I don't know, something that's going to infect my computer. But after a day or so of thinking about it, I thought, I need to know what's going on, and reading the standard operating procedure manual of Camp Echo at Guantanamo Bay would be a way for me to begin to understand that. And so
what surprised you when you were reading? I mean, it must have been surprisingly boring, even. Or what was your initial emotional reaction?
I think that my main takeaway was that we are a country of laws, and that procedure and sort of rules and regulations are central to our self-identity as a culture. And I think that that's probably one of the best things about the United States. At the same time, among the items of interest in there were all of these clearly well-researched explorations of how to deal with Muslim prisoners, like the call to prayer, orienting the people in the cells toward Mecca, how to do a Muslim burial, including how to wrap the body and what to say. Just sort of preposterous if you think about it. Well, why don't you just bring an imam to Guantanamo and actually minister to people? And in any case,
well, it's also this sort of schizophrenic combination of disrespect and respect. We'll drown you and make you think you're about to die, but we'll make sure you can pray in the right direction.
Exactly.
I mean, what kind of mentality is that?
Sure, right. It's our sort of fake diversity.
Yeah. Multicultural Guantanamo. That's what
exactly.
It was.
Totally. But it was also interesting to know that pretty quickly some nasty procedures developed by MI and CIA down there involved doing things like throwing the Quran in the toilet, and women interrogators approaching prisoners and touching them sexually and pretending that they were menstruating and smearing them with menstruation blood and stuff like that, meant that all this cultural knowledge, which is so in itself a good thing, became used for this sort of nefarious ends, which was cruel and degrading treatment of the prisoners. So nothing in the manual would suggest this sort of dark underside. You know, I always think of Slavoj Žižek talking about Kant and Sade as these sort of two pairings of the Enlightenment, and in a way, the portrait of Guantanamo as the SOP on the top is Kant, but Sade is everything that kind of happened that we learned in the process.
You mean you need the law in order to have perversity?
It's quite possible. There seems to be this mutually beneficial kind of relationship happening, right? I mean, the Enlightenment was also very good at sort of, you know, justifying slavery and things like that. So, yeah.
Well, I was wondering, would you like to read a portion of the book?
Absolutely, and I'd really like it if you'd help me read it, because this is sort of a polyvocal poem. This is on page 11.
Okay.
It's called Public Address.
Oh, sorry, the elevator. So, I was wondering at this point, would you like to read part of the book for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's read one together. This is
Do you have one in mind?
Yeah, Public Address, Ghost Soldiers. This is from the Abu Ghraib arias sequence. And the title, and the poem sort of has these two different sort of fonts, actually not fonts, but one part of the text is faded, and I'll read that, and you're going to read the sort of regular.
What is a ghost soldier?
So a ghost soldier is the name that they gave for people in a report that they don't know who they were actually, and most likely they were military intelligence or CIA. So they're just known as ghost soldiers. Like, who knows who they are? So let's start from the title.
Okay. Public address.
Ghost soldiers.
The importance of keeping accurate and complete.
Don't ask, you don't ask, you don't, you just say yes, sir, when they say.
Keep accurate and complete. Intelligence, value.
The prisoner
Extracted.
is dead. We weren't here. Have a good day. We say yes, sir. They were. We don't.
To play the call to prayer.
The prisoner.
In a calm, clear voice. So this poem and the book as a whole are very polyphonic, where there are a lot of different voices. Here you have a kind of official bureaucratic voice with a more individual voice. So how did you go about crafting this, and what materials were appropriated, if any?
Right. For the Abu Ghraib aria section, I was working through at least 2 or 3 different texts. One was the Standard Operating Procedure Manual, of which the regular text, the importance of keeping accurate and complete, comes from. And I think I just had, a manuscript of 100 pages of just little fragments of it. I sort of took it apart in a way, like you can take apart a car. I sort of took apart the Standard Operating Procedure Manual and just thought of it as its own thing, and kind of sat on it for a while. But was also working with the testimonies of Abu Ghraib prisoners and other voices, actually, testimonies of the U.S. servicemen. At some point, it seemed really essential to figure out a way of setting them into conversation with each other. And for this poem in particular, I knew that I wanted to have this poem not just be a public address, which is how it started, but also to exemplify that kind of,
like bureaucratic versus intimate.
Exactly. I mean, the Kant Sade thing, like the official language and then the unofficial, the dark side language. And the fact, of the need to keep accurate and complete, records being juxtaposed against this idea that, you're not going to say, who you saw, and you just say yes, sir, and you move on. And it's not something that these soldiers liked either, but that's the reality in which they found themselves.
Well, that the U.S. soldier who is the order bringer and the lawgiver is themselves already a ghost, and
Right.
abstract and unrecorded.
Yeah, absolutely, right, and that's the weird thing probably about being a soldier, is that you're always aware that you're sort of you're representing the state. And I think of that Jarrell poem, from my mother's sleep I fell into the state, that incredible, the death of the ball turret gunner. Yeah. And I mean, I should just say as an aside, one of the fascinating things about this scandal and some of the other excesses of the war on terror were opposed by professional organizations like the Defense Department. The military was really uncomfortable with the procedures that were going on, the torture that was going on, because for a lot of reasons, it was against military, codes. It was against the culture of, following rules. And I think that what's so remarkable about looking back at the Abu Ghraib prison scandal is how a certain kind of madness descended upon institutions which are flawed but have codes and regulations and rules and a kind of morality, and how that just sort of dissipated in the face of this great kind of fear and paranoia.
So there's one text that I was very surprised that you appropriated from, which is the Bible.
Right.
You have a lot of parts that are from Genesis, or the book starts with a quote from Corinthians. And I'd read somewhere that you kind of started the book as part of your process of experiencing Lent.
Right.
So I was wondering if you could talk about that part of the book.
Sure. The sort of looking at this testimonies of prisoners was extremely painful. I mean, I don't want to. I'm not an overly dramatic person, but reading testimonies of torture victims is hard. It's not for the faint of heart. And I decided that when I found them, that what I wanted to do is every morning during Lent, which is this sort of 40 days of reflection and attempting to, fast either physically or spiritually from life, that I wanted to work through these texts in some way. And the only way that I could actually deal with them was to have a pencil or a marker in hand to find phrases that were speaking to me really in a direct way. And they seemed to almost vibrate off the page. And that became part of my meditation and contemplation. And in some ways, I hope a kind of a process of making amends for what my country did. So on some level, to sort of witness to that. I had just a really beautiful experience, which was a Jesuit priest I know who was writing about the book, said that he took these poems and every day prayed with one. And to me, that was almost like this sort of circling back toward my process. So his process of reading was sort of like my process of writing the poems. So that was really intentional, and I think that maybe that's part of my process, is to think about the work of writing as something that's kind of ritualistic a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because when people talk about process, they always flatten it to like a formal procedure. Like you do this active labor for 15 hours a day, you
Right.
punch in a clock, like tension xia, you have this document, you erase every 6 word. It's trying to create a routinizing procedure.
Sure.
But the idea of moral contemplation as a formal procedure is like kind of interesting, because it dissolves the idea that you can have a form that is separated from like your spirituality or your morality.
Yeah. I was quite taken with C.A. Conrad's work doing these somatics, and the prefatory note to the book, which the name I'm going to forget, but it's this sort of eco-deviance, in which he says that he came from a family of sort of essentially factory workers, people who punch in a clock, and found their lives slowly drained away by this kind of routinized labor, and suddenly realized that he had a same process with his own writing, and that it sort of horrified him, and he stopped writing for a while to think about what it meant that he was approaching his own craft of poetry, his own art of poetry the same way. So I feel a great sympathy for, and I was sort of excited by this revelation, because I have to say that part of me has this ridiculous sort of Calvinist work ethic about poems. Like, I feel like, you know, I want to demystify the process a lot, and I want to just be able to sit down every day and just work on poems and not get into this whole romantic swirl about, you know, the muse visiting me or about, you know, the right moment. So I have both things going on in myself, and I think that both can be productive and both can be dangerous. You know, routinization is dangerous, and also assuming that sort of, I don't know what you call it, spiritual visitation, or, you know, is also kind of, I don't know, sanctimonious or sort of strange.
Well, I mean, it seems like you're not doing it out of some kind of impersonal, like, dogmatic, proselytizing space, right?
Right. Well, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. I was, just last night I was talking in this forum in which I got an award for the Catholic imagination, and it always seemed kind of strange because, you know, I grew up Catholic and I practice my faith, but, you know, as Robert Frost said about poetry, is a lover's quarrel with the world. I have a lover's quarrel certainly with the institutional church, and, you know, also with the idea of faith, you know, and, you know, I probably could argue about every line in a prayer that, you know, I'm supposed to say with absolute conviction, you know. Our Father who art in heaven. Father? Why not mother? You know? And why does it have to be a person, actually?
Yeah.
And who's our, you know? Like, so it's a strange thing, but I feel like it's been that my growing up in a faith tradition became organizing for me. And I think what draws people to faith is its tremendous meaning-making sort of structure and its community-building aspect. And so the thing that artists always do is they like that, but they also feel very queasy about what they're giving up in the process of this exchange.
Yeah.
So it's it's like a sort of a tight coat that you know keeps you warm, but maybe doesn't give you full range of motion.
So a few years ago, you showed me this incredible photograph of, I think it was your grandparents. So they immigrated from, was it from
Lebanon?
Lebanon to Jordan to Mexico, and then they crossed from Mexico south of the border. Is that right?
Right. So my grandfather's family left Lebanon, and the official story was something like, I mean, it's so mythic that you almost like want to question its truthfulness, but apparently he was working for the sort of the Ottoman Empire, and there was a Muslim man who was stealing the water supply. He was on top of a valley, and he diverted this water, and the town folk below, which was a Christian town, according to the story, asked the military to intervene, and so Skandar, my great-grandfather, was sort of sent up there after other people had failed, and because he was, I don't know, he was a good warrior or whatever. His last name was Aburjeli, which means father of men. So I don't know. Again, that
you would have had that name if not for Ellis Island.
Right, exactly. Or Laredo, Texas, in this case. It was said that he could bend a dime between his thumb and his forefinger. That's what my grandfather told me. And I was thinking, like, man, he's just like a Superman, you know?
So he would, like, crush coal into diamonds.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where
exactly. I mean, he was destined to be in a graphic novel, but it hasn't happened yet. In any case, there was some sort of reprisal in the Christian town. I read about this in a poem called The Ballad of Skandar, and he lets the guy go because he's actually shot, and the Muslim guy helps him, and he lets him go. So he has to go into exile, and he travels somewhere to Latin America, and I don't believe he first went to Mexico, but he ended up in Salina Cruz, which is a small town in Mexico, where he set up a store. And he was actually shot and killed by bandits or revolutionaries. Some
Wow.
people killed him, and so
In Mexico.
my great-grandmother and my grandfather and his siblings all went north to New York, where they had some people. They went through Laredo, Texas, and you know, on the document where they crossed the border, they're said to be Syrian citizens because Lebanon didn't exist.
Yeah.
But they very much identified with, you know, with Lebanon. So that's just a little of the weird story of that immigration. And my grandmother's story is really different and involves Haiti, actually,
Really?
of all places. In fact, we still have cousins in Haiti.
Really?
Yeah.
So what was her story?
Her family, her father was a very well-to-do businessman and had lots of trade going on in various points in Latin America, including in Haiti. And they actually would go back and forth between New York and Haiti. She spent a lot of time there. The family had something like 9 children. And during the Depression, I think he experienced some great losses. Long story short, he died. Family lore is he was poisoned by someone. Because
Wow.
it couldn't just be that he died of a heart attack.
You have a lot of intrigue and war on both sides of your family.
Yes, exactly. And so my grandmother came to New York, and with the help of a priest, sort of, you know, and a cousin, sort of set up in Brooklyn Heights, 290 Hicks
Wow.
Street, which was the family.
Yeah.
Sort
It used
of
to be called Little Syria.
residence.
I live
Yeah.
in that neighborhood. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. In fact, you know, like Sahadi's Bakery
Yeah.
and all those places were very much part of their place, their life. In fact, the day after 9/11, there was a story done, and it showed Atlantic Avenue, and Sahadi's was in the story. They went there to sort of think about and look around for Muslims or something. And I thought, you know, that's where my family is from. So, yeah.
So Phil, we just had a really unforgettable conversation. We definitely did not shoot this segment first and splice at the end. I'll
did
never
not.
forget any of the things we talked about. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks. It's nothing like New York water.
This is going to be a little insane, huh?